Forums.
Okay, we'll get started. Do we have any public comments today?
Do not have any today.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
Jump ahead to approving the meeting minutes from last month. Any changes?
I have a few changes that are suggestions. On the second page, under Portland Urban Forest Plan, number 1 bullet, or I guess you call it a few of the biggest barriers to having trees. I think on the root damage, it should say root damage to sidewalks. It's just not, I don't think people are worried about damage to tree roots. They're worried about the damage to the sidewalks from tree roots. A general comment, and you do it practically all the time. Within the past year, there's been an informal decision, I believe, within the meetings and in minutes to give people titles, never refer to people by only their first name. And so, and you do a pretty good job on it, but there are a few where you missed it. Belinda was a Belinda once, and most of the time she's a Belinda Judelman, but just if we want to be consistent, I would encourage that. That's all I had.
Thanks for this.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson.
Other corrections or edits? All right, do we have a motion to approve June's minutes with those edits that were brought up? Commissioner Nelson, I'm sorry.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from last month.
I can second it.
Great, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. All right, I guess we can move on to the city councilors.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, commissioners. I have 5 items for you today. First up, last month on June 26th, and as recommended by the Urban Forestry Commission, City Council approved the designation of 5 trees as new City of Portland heritage trees and removed the heritage tree designation from 7 trees. So thank you for your work on that. Congratulations. Second item, I wanted to let you know that the Portland Clean Energy Community Fund Equitable Tree Canopy Work Group Kickoff is scheduled for July 29th. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability PSEF team selected the work group members using criteria to represent centered communities and experience relevant to the project. And as I'm sure you all will recall, because you all have spent a lot of time discussing this, the Equitable Tree Canopy Program is about expanding canopy and centering community in doing so, especially in the priority neighborhoods that are low canopy. So that work group includes a Forestry Commission representative, Casey Clapp. Thank you, Casey, for representing. And I guess you know, July 29th is your first meeting.
Yeah, I learned this.
Good. We are excited to see the work group progressing and that whole project continuing. My third item, I also wanted to share with you that on July 1st, the beginning of the new fiscal year, management and administration of the BES Environmental Services Tree Program transitioned from BES to Urban Forestry. The change is an outcome of the City Council Resolution 37635, which you probably also will recall, that was passed by City Council in November of 2023. And it directed the consolidation of tree operations into Portland Parks and Recreation. The change has also been part of the Natural Resources Service Delivery Project, on which former Commissioner Ivory Iheanacho and Commissioner Lilly continues to represent the Urban Forestry Commission. Thank you, Commissioner Lilly, and Commissioner Iheanacho in absentia. That move is part of an effort to consolidate the city's tree and forest management under a single department that should allow for more unified and streamlined operations and service delivery, and more integrated and full tree life cycle urban forest management by parks. Urban Forestry and BES have been working very closely together over the last few months to make this transition, and it's gone really well. The contracts for tree establishment care have already moved from Bureau of Environmental Services to Urban Forestry. The transition covers approximately 2,000 trees that were planted by BES with contractors. That means Urban Forestry is now overseeing the contractors to establish the trees that had been planted. We've hired 3 new staff to manage those contracts. They are now out there monitoring those trees. We're working with the contractors on follow-up needs so that the establishment is successful. They're also refining the inherited data and tracking and integrating that information into the larger urban forestry program. BES staff who in the past worked on tree planting are now working in other areas of BES. And as a reminder, funding for this is also from the Portland Clean Energy Fund. Y'all may recall that the commission recommended this funding be approved by council. I want to acknowledge managers Angie DeSalvo of Urban Forestry and Ken Finney of Bureau of Environmental Services for their extensive work together on making that transition smooth. My 4th item is some spoiler or trailer for future agenda items. As you all have requested and discussed, we are working on developing a risk management and urban forestry agenda content for y'all, and also a tour of trees in development. So stay tuned for those. And my last item is just a reminder that if anyone has requests for city forester reports in the future, please let me know. Just shoot me an email, or you can send it to Brian as well. I'm always happy to try to include information, relevant information that you would like to hear about. That concludes my report. If anyone has any questions, please let me know.
I actually have one more thing to add,
Thank you.
just because I got this morning. Our recruitment to fill our 2 vacancies has been live for a few months. We've got 13 applications so far, which is great. It will run until I believe the first weekend in August, and typically we get a lot of applications at the end. So off to a good start, but obviously if you know of people who you think would make great commissioners, let them know.
Brian? Related to that, I had someone reach out to me about my experience and ask me questions, and I just wanted to kind of be transparent about that. And is it okay that I share that? And
Oh yeah,
okay,
absolutely,
all right,
for sure.
Please do.
okay. And it was positive. I was saying good things. I was trying to convert. So.
Should we?
I think I'm sorry to see that the people who were working on BES's tree program, that their experience is lost, and that I'm not surprised that they've switched to other entities. If they've worked for BES for many years, it seems understandable they'd want to stay within that bureau, but I think it's a loss to the city. But those are decisions that others made, so we'll live with it.
Thanks for sharing your opinion, Commissioner Nelson. to that, I'll respond that our teams continue to work together on the transition. So we are in fact on a daily basis working with the BES staff who used to be involved in tree planting to make sure we are collecting all the information they have and documenting it into our formats so we can use it. So it is not being lost.
Okay.
And both of the teams have committed to continuing to share information for as long as. And since I mentioned the PSEF Equitable Tree Canopy Work Group, I believe there is a BES representative in that group.
There is.
I think it's Amy Chomowitz.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's for that purpose, to capture their background and experience with trees. Thanks for bringing that up.
Commissioner Feldstein?
Thanks, great report. Had a question. I know we're going to do a deep dive into kind of risk management, but I just was trying to remember the state of things. So there was a loss of a big tree in the last few days, kind of a sudden loss onto the basketball court at Irving Park, which is my, local park. And just wondered where we were. My memory is that we are now able to sort of do proactive surveillance much more than we have been able to do in the past with increased staff and so forth, but that there was a big backlog in that. Where are we with that? And what are the plans on that? It did fall at a time when there was nobody there, but
Yeah, we have plenty of time.
Okay, well, thank you for that question, Commission Chair Feldstein. I happen to have had a detailed check-in with the Tree Maintenance Operations Manager, Paul Anderson, earlier this week. And can tell you specifically that since 2022, when Paul started in his role, we have had an 80% reduction in backlog for outstanding work orders for tree work. Now, this work includes things outside of parks properties. However, the vast majority of those are indeed relevant for parks properties. When prior to 2022, we had cases that could be 5 years old that had been requested as far as 5 years prior to being able to get to that service request. Reminder that these are non-emergency. Emergencies have been and continue to be addressed immediately with a 24/7 standby service for all city properties and public streets. So these are cases that were deemed not emergent, but needed to be addressed at some point, and they were prioritized according to the time of need. The reason it took so long to get to them, as you identified, Commissioner Feldstein, is that we did not have enough resources. And there, I can bring it home by saying that backlog reduction is because of the Parks Levy and the additional funding that was granted to Urban Forestry to develop the park tree maintenance program, which is in full swing. This year, we should be able to complete our first look and first assessment and initial tree work in all of the remaining parks properties in the city. And we'll be happy to give you all an update on that at a future meeting if you'd like in more detail.
In this particular case, had a review of my understanding is there was a plan to evaluate on a regular basis trees in all parks and identify hazard ones and that sort of stuff. And was this an outlier? Had this park already been checked on and for some reason it wasn't caught, or is it on the schedule to be looked at within this year or next year, something like that? I'm just wonder, was this preventable or was it just on the schedule to eventually get there? Do you know?
With over 400 parks and 1.2 million park trees, I can't say for
Yeah,
sure.
okay.
We have that data, and if you're interested, I can look for it. We can send it to you via email. But
Okay.
I suspect that Irving Park was one of the earlier parks that was inspected and proactive tree work done, and that this was not anticipated.
Okay.
Reminder, this applies also to tree risk, bringing it back, and risk management in an urban forest. Inspections are good for the time of the inspection and a brief period going forward. However, other actions or weather conditions or pest pathogens can happen to a tree, obviously after the inspection that change the status of the tree. I suspect that's what the case would have been.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. And I'll follow up. We'll follow up with an email about that particular tree.
Any other questions or comments about the forester's report? Okay, we're a little ahead of schedule.
Yeah, we are.
So we can move on to the urban forest plan canopy targets.
So I'm Belinda Udelman, as you all know, planning and policy analyst with Urban Forestry. I have a couple of slides that I'll go through, and then the majority of our time together will be for discussion. At our last meeting, just as a refresher, we started the discussion about setting canopy targets for the Portland Urban Forest Plan. So we talked about what canopy targets are, shared some results from the literature review and industry practice review that we've done as part of this effort. And then sort of started talking about what the city's current targets are and what our guidelines are for setting our new targets. So I'm not going to repeat all of that, but if you have questions about it, I can answer those. And then as a reminder, our process for setting the targets is kind of split into these 4 steps. So first we did our literature and peer city practice review. Then the project team identified some preliminary options, so just things for us to consider as a starting point for discussion. And so now we're in kind of this step 3 where we're reviewing these options, discussing them with our advisory committees, and all of you. We'll continue to have staff discussions and review community feedback to make sure that the options that we are considering are responsive to what we've heard from community. And once we define our approach, meaning what kind of spatial units are we going to use? Is it going to be citywide? Is it going to be neighborhood? Then we will start the process of actually setting what the target is, what that percentage is, and what our timeline is for getting there. So these are the options that are at this point on the table. Based on what we've seen from what other cities have done and what we have access to and in alignment with existing city plans. So we can have a citywide goal. It could be a neighborhood minimum. A goal for transportation right of way, so for street trees. It could be by land use. And there it could be specific land uses as those called out, like parks and open space, commercial areas or industrial areas. Or it could just be, for one of those are all options on the table. And then the last one is pattern areas. And these are areas identified in our comprehensive plan. So these reflect what's shown on the map. So it's a little bit, it's kind of in between the citywide and neighborhood level. Looking at the western side of the river is all one, except for the gray areas, which are the rivers area, which includes a lot of natural areas as well as industrial areas. Our central city, which is the dark gray, the inner neighborhoods, and then eastern, reflecting areas, mostly east of 205. So we can select one of these, a combination, or more likely a combination of these.
See Commissioner Bechtel has.
Oh, thank you.
Belinda, forgive my ignorance. Can you explain what pattern areas means?
Yeah, I might let Brian respond to it.
Yeah, so pattern areas are part of Title 33, the city's zoning code. And they, what we see is that a lot of the city's zoning, for mixed use or residential, they have different requirements based on the pattern area that they're in. So they're sort of meant to reflect the sort of built form of the city is different, whether you're in the central city, these inner neighborhoods, eastern neighborhood, and western. So it's really about kind of how the built environment and the sort of mix of commercial, residential, and industrial areas. So we haven't really talked about that at the UFC before, but as we've been exploring ways of setting canopy targets, this sort of emerged as one nice way of sort of grouping the city into areas that have similar patterns in terms of what the land use looks like. So and it has the benefit of them potentially tying canopy targets more closely to the city's zoning codes. So when the updates are made, we can sort of consider that. So one is to make sure that's sort of like an option that we have.
Thank you.
So, yeah, sorry,
So just to clarify, so what would that look like? Like if we were gonna, like, how would that play out if we were gonna make decisions based on the pattern areas?
Yeah, it would be sort of reflecting, so in the same way that our currently we have different canopy targets for industrial versus commercial versus open space. It could be that the different canopy targets for each pattern area. So it could be knowing that western pattern area, lots of steep slopes, forested areas, areas that are not allowed to be developed because of overlay zones, things like that, probably has higher potential canopy. And then as opposed to like a central city, which allows for buildings to be built right up to the lot line, much more dense, might have lower. And so I think it allowed us to look at kind of build up to what the potential canopy is based on land use, expected future infill development, how much actual space do we have for trees. So it would kind of allow us to sort of group like areas with similar factors and then set canopy targets based on all of that.
that
Yeah.
helps thinking.
Yeah, sure.
It could also be a way to help sort of make sure we're getting towards that citywide goal. So if we had citywide and pattern areas, we would want to make sure that whatever we set for our pattern areas would get us towards that citywide goal. So that's kind of, now it's just open for discussion. So I'd love to hear more questions if you have them. Also kind of initial thoughts about what you like and dislike. So kind of pros and cons that you see for some of these different options. If you have a preferred option or combination of options, or if there's something that's not listed that you would like us to consider and dive deeper into, we're certainly open to that.
The way canopy helps people is when they are directly around it. And so I think citywide canopy goals, I don't think are the way to go. Because you can raise the canopy of the city and you still have people in different parts of the town that have no trees. I think land use types to me, they make more sense, although I know they change, but we set a canopy goal for industrial areas. We know how many acres that is. We set a canopy goal for residential neighborhoods. Maybe that's neighborhood by neighborhood. I want our canopy goals to be a way to get canopy to where people live and work. And I don't think an overall citywide goal gets at that, because if we say we want 15% in industrial areas, then we work specifically in industrial areas to get 15%. And even if the citywide canopy increases, if the industrial area canopy is decreasing for whatever reason, that means that should be a priority area. So I know, I think most commonly it's a citywide goal, and maybe that's a start. But I'm not confident. I mean, we know in our city, you've identified different residential neighborhoods that have very low canopy and others that have high canopy. That's been a very useful tool, even though that's on a neighborhood level, which is not strictly land use, but because it includes some commercial areas within those residential areas. And some areas have more difficult areas, like if you have a railroad line and a lot of major roads going through your neighborhood, like Cully, you're obviously reducing the canopy. It makes it harder to get more canopy. So I like a common neighborhood, but by land use also. I just don't think a citywide goal. I don't think it's the best way to go.
Yeah.
It's better than nothing, but I don't think it's that useful.
Yeah, I think that aligns with, what we've been hearing from staff and community as well. Yeah, if we really want equitable tree canopy, just having citywide goal is not gonna get us there. Let's track that. I do want to say, so currently, we track canopy level by neighborhood. It's not just residential neighborhood.
Right, yeah.
Just to clarify. And we did actually explore the idea of just focusing on residential neighborhoods in an effort to make sure we're providing canopy where people live. But because of our zoning code and mixed use zoning, there actually isn't really a way that you can really measure that. So that's why that specifically is not listed in there. But we do have neighborhood, because that is something we could measure.
Yeah, we don't really have residential neighborhoods. Almost every zone except for industrial allows for residential units. And so there's really no residential neighborhood. We have residents everywhere. So.
Commissioner Vandermark?
Thank you for that additional context. What I always try to start with, and the staff I work with hear me say this all the time, is what is our goal? And then knowing what our goal is to guide the method that we use to get there. And I feel like a lot of the goal that we talk about is having an equitable canopy across the city. So if the option that we use here doesn't capture that, then I think we're failing our goal, right? So whatever's going to allow us to use that, I think needs to be the method we use. I think appreciating kind of the land use and pattern areas, like I would just want to understand whatever it is, how do we capture kind of to Bruce's point, both where people live and where they work within that, whether it's a combination of land use and pattern areas, right? To ensure that we're putting trees where they need to go from an equitable perspective. But I also would want to just layer in where there is potential, right? I know the city has done a lot for that. So certain areas have more potential for trees for a lot of historical reasons. So I think that needs to calculate into the options that we consider is, where, like if it's in the right of way, if it's in, industrial areas, public spaces, et cetera, that we don't fail to capture that in the methodology that we use. So I think it's going to need to be a layered approach across these. And I would just say like, citywide goal in and of itself isn't going to get us to that, but I don't think at the end of the day, if we had a citywide goal in addition to it, I think there's something about the power of saying where the city is as a whole, as a subset of those other areas that could be powerful. I think that the goals by zone, pattern area, land use, what have you, neighborhood could inform what that citywide goal is, that those should be the driver. But I think sometimes there's something very tangible to people about also having a citywide goal and sharing how far behind, in fact, we may be tracking from that goal.
Commissioner Bechtel?
Thank you. I agree with what's been said. I just wanted to emphasize my personal viewpoint, which I would love to see neighborhood minimums. I feel that it's one of the reasons why I joined the commission is I feel strongly about equitable tree canopy, especially in economically challenged areas. I just think, especially we're seeing this now, this summer, it is so hot. And I think there's a lot of neighborhoods that are experiencing even more longer periods of heat. And I think the tree canopy development in those areas would be critical in long-term thriving of the area.
Commissioner Philipsen?
Yeah, also love everything that's been said, agree with it. Just a few thoughts that I have about, how we might think of this from a kind of a program development quality improvement perspective. And that is that I think all of these things that you have listed are important to measure if we can, right? So we might be getting a little confused about measurement and tracking versus goal setting and work plan to get there. In terms of the measurement, again, we've talked about all these kinds of things before, and they all have their merit. The only thing I might consider adding, and this was sort of brought up, the equitable tree canopy, within neighborhoods, I'll take Irvington, my neighborhood, as an example. There's a lot of change in socioeconomic status throughout the neighborhood, right? And you see a huge change in the canopy according to that. In large part, so that the idea that we also look at canopy by, for example, socioeconomic status stratum, I think would be an important thing to do if we can do it, for the long term. In terms of, I think we're sort of missing some information, and that is, it'd be nice to sort of have a sense of, for all of these different areas like neighborhood and industrial, etc., what could be a minimum based upon, the literature out there, sort of a medium range accomplishment and like a pie in the sky future. And then also what would be the, in quotes, easier ones. And I think a lot of people have already referred to these concepts, so that, in developing a work plan, we would consider issues of like feasibility and bang for your buck, so to speak, in terms of, developing like an implementation plan to get there.
And just to follow up, to clarify, when you're talking about looking at canopy by socioeconomic class or level, are you thinking sort of as we do already with our determination of our priority service areas, which is looking at using census data to look at income throughout the city and canopy level, and then identifying, people living in with a lower income have this kind of access to canopy? Is it in that way, or is it really incorporating it into these canopy targets? I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Either way is important. I think that's very reasonable what you've done before, using that. If you want to look at issues of like disparity within neighborhoods or disparities within parks in the city, then you might want to be able to cross-cut all these things. It's a matter of, the funding and the methods we have for data and tracking. If you collect the variables, you could, cross-cut them anyway. It makes sense for a given project. But that sounds like a great start, what we've been doing.
Okay, so it's continuing to make sure we're analyzing things that way to make sure we're working towards equitable canopy distribution, but not necessarily like a goal for different socioeconomic classes. I just want to.
No, but my guess is,
Correctly.
and you've shown before, that there's a larger disparity, right, in the
Yes,
lower.
yeah.
And so therefore, that's going to be likely an earlier priority area. I'll buy it more difficult, right? So there's all these factors to determine what's the right work plan over time and what's the right goal.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying. Commissioner Lilly?
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what everyone has been saying. I'm in favor of a neighborhood minimum and sort of the land use type situations and sort of like if this area is zoned for X, Y, and Z and should have an environmental impact of X, Y, and Z, then it should at minimum have a mitigation of this and that. So I'm in favor of something like that. But in pattern areas, I think a lot of the conversation is also just very human centric. I definitely agree with like benefits of low income communities as well as getting trees to folks who may need it. But also thinking of like what's a good tree canopy in like as birds are migrating through our city, as critters are trying to make their way through, or the environmental like waterways and drainage and like some of those things. What is the best mechanism for that? Is it like elevation, or is it just like that there's some kind of grid across the city that they can make it through? Is it some kind of historical migration pattern? I'm not sure what those are, but I just definitely want to uplift that and make sure that we're considering that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I like that idea of sort of incorporating kind of habitat connectivity and then also looking if there are some specific areas that we know are used by species or migratory species.
Thank you. I think I agree with the idea that the citywide goal is not necessarily the best for all the reasons that have been talked about before. But I do also agree with Commissioner Vandermark that it's the only way for us to really compare ourselves with other cities. It's like the big number that we need for that. And I don't think it's unhelpful. So I think that should be kind of an overarching something to shoot for so that we can say, we don't have to have one goal and that's the only thing. I think it would be appropriate to have one goal that we're shooting for and then a bunch of smaller goals or subset goals that we can use to get to that main goal. So in that regard, I think we should make that as was brought up, I think a couple sessions ago, the citywide goal should be high, should be higher than we have right now. And I think it should be at least aspirational. And I think that when we initially set it up, the kind of political climate has been very different. I think we should go back to the idea that Portland sets the bar, sets the standard, and if we fail, then we can take that. But that's what we're shooting for. I think that's the appropriate thing to do for a progressive city that wants to shoot for the stars and wants to actually say, yes, we see that there's an issue here. We're trying to aggressively approach it. The second thing is, I think that a neighborhood minimum would be the best guide, but I think how do we choose the minimum should have something to do with a literal heat map of the city. So we take this view of the city and overlay literal heat. So, what is the hottest part of the city? And I know we have that information. That should be where we focus. So use that as a guide to bring those minimums up. So what is the minimum tree canopy? Well, we're not really measuring that. We're measuring the minimum heat, like how much of this space is over a certain temperature, is generally hotter all the time. So that way we're not measuring how many trees we put in the ground, how big are those trees, we're measuring the impact of those trees. And I think that's ultimately what we want. Next thing, I think that we should focus our efforts in that regard on the right of way, transportation rights of way. Reason I think that is that that's where the city has the biggest purview. We could tell everyone until we're blue in the face to plant trees on their property. And they may or they may not. We have no control of that. We can say, yes, you should. Here's all the reasons why. But ultimately, if we go to a land use and we go to industrial areas and we say, you should plant trees, they're just gonna laugh us out of the room. I've had this happen myself when I tell them to plant street trees and they look at me incredulously and say, this is an industrial area. And I look back and I say, no, that's why you got to plant your tree. But that's the only control we have at the city of Portland or the forestry is the right of way. So I think we should do a similar thing with a heat map and say which roads have the smallest amount of canopy and how can we increase that? Because that's where people are walking, they're standing and waiting for the bus. That's where kids are getting to school, biking, huge thing. Clinton Street versus Going Street, vastly different in terms of where you're biking, yet they're both extraordinarily busy bike routes. And I think that would be the best way to start to prioritize our goals, to say, okay, this neighborhood is hot. These roads in particular are really hot. And we can have the biggest impact with the things that we have some amount of control over, just the right of way. And I don't think we should focus on parks and open space because they're really good already. We can focus on things that are really bad right now. And a lot of the things that are going on in parks has been a big priority for a long time. So I think that should be one of the least priorities. I think in terms of the way you have it right now, if we flip that upside down, that would be the priority: industrial, commercial, then parks and open space. Yeah, so those are the three big points that I wanted to make.
Commissioner Clapp, I was appreciating your example going in Clinton. Could you speak a little bit to how you envision canopy goals relative to like big streets like Division,
Yeah.
Burnside? It'd be interesting to hear from you what your thoughts there are.
Yeah, well, personally, I think the city should take over planting and management of all right-of-way trees 100%. And once that is the case, then we can make a better argument for planting trees in those spaces rather than trying to convince the adjacent commercial property owners they should plant a tree and maintain it. So aside from that, if we take a heat map and look at roads like Division and Burnside, if we go out to East Portland, look at 122nd, 162nd, all of those second streets, because everything in Portland is on a second. Anyone knows that? It's 52nd, it's 32nd, all these things. So I think that if we are to look at those streets and we say, hey, here is where it is dark, we could go out and find planting spaces for our planting and establishment protocol and just mark with white paint and say, here are all the open spaces that we can have a tree be planted, and then plant the biggest possible tree we can there. Prioritize trees that are not under power lines and that are next to bus routes or bus stops particularly, and things like that. So I think that they're big streets, they have a lot of space, and we just need to get something planted there at some point. I don't know if that really answers your question.
My question probably wasn't as clear as it could have been. Specific to canopy goals and your thinking on that. The examples you gave to me aren't especially big streets. So I just wondered how you would translate your input on canopy goals to the big streets like 122nd, 82nd Division, et cetera.
I think those would be the priority streets based on if we put a map of large rights of way and then we overlay a heat map to figure out which are the hottest roads. Mm-hmm. That's where I think that the priority should be, because that would be a hot area. So it'd be probably in a space that has that is a hot neighborhood. It also doesn't have any trees. So no matter what we look at, if we say, does this neighborhood have trees? The answer is no, priority. Is this a really hot neighborhood? Yes, priority. So it would meet kind of both of those ideas where if we just look at the darkest color orange, that's where we should look for it, and then look for the streets themselves so that we can at least get the canopy coverage on what we own and manage, the highest it can be, and then start to try to convince other property owners and entities that they should also reach up there. So it's the thing that we can do without asking permission, so to speak, or without necessarily putting somebody else, put the onus on somebody else.
Thanks for the clarification.
Commissioner Bechtold?
Yeah, I just want to chime in on this discussion about transportation right away and street trees. I live off Division, so I would love to see more trees, but also recognize how narrow the road is. And these are all, I think the biggest challenge is this is very technical in terms of developing goals and where the goals would apply in specific areas, because we do have major thoroughfares that are pretty narrow, and there would be significant impact potentially to because I do work for Portland General Electric, the utility right away or the road right away and the line. So understanding that there's some complexity there, especially for options for road widening, which is something that may be coming down the line. But just wanted to flag, if we utilize the transportation right away as one of our goals, we should look the corresponding impact to the street tree maintenance program. There might be potential budgetary impacts if we utilize that as one of our goals, and we're taking over street tree maintenance. We may want to be thoughtful about how those two things intertwine.
I just had something quick to add, really good point, Commissioner Bechtold, on future impact. If we're gonna take over street tree maintenance and we want to expand the street tree canopy, our costs are gonna increase over time, so I think it's important to note that. I also just want to add, when it comes to street trees, Portland's a city of small blocks. We have short blocks, which is great, there's a lot of benefits from that. It also means we have a lot more right of way than some cities of similar size. Which we have a lot more pavement than other cities might have. But also means there's a lot of potential for street trees then, and particularly, Commissioner Claps note that the city has more regulatory authority over those trees. We can directly manage them. So that's a real opportunity, and I just want to kind of flag that as a really interesting approach, because Portland's unique in that way. Most cities have larger blocks, which means the road area is a lot less. So just wanted to note that.
I will add, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Annalise. Three. Lando.
Y'all can call me Brian.
I wanted to add too that Commissioner Bechtold is absolutely correct. Very more technical tree existence in rights of way than perhaps any other property type, city owned, park, private in the city. However, compared to other cities, while we may have more pavement, we are a bit behind in how we create tree space in rights of way. There are technical options that the city hasn't really explored or applied yet. One of those, is underway as a pilot, the Trees in the Curve Zone project. However, there's more than that could be done.
I just want to add a couple thoughts, and again, love everything that folks are bringing up. Thank you, Commissioner Lilly, for also grounding us that it's not just about humans, because our ecosystem is really important and we benefit in lots of ways, but it's also just for its own sake that we should be thinking about other living beings besides us. But one of my thoughts about the pattern areas was just a little bit of concern about, and I don't think this is how it's intended, but recognizing that the history of our city and the way it was built has been damaging to folks, especially in East Portland, North Portland, areas that have lower canopies as a result of those decisions that were made. And I don't want to unintentionally bake that in further by sort of, saying, well, we have these really big roads in East Portland, which means we can't plant as many trees, so therefore our targets are lower there. Because I feel like that's just perpetuating those same problems that we already have now. And the other thing on that note, I love this concept of multi-solving when we can solve two problems at once. East Portland also has some of the highest traffic death fatalities, right? And so we know that trees help slow traffic. I think there's some issues here that for example, Division is a good case of also sometimes the city, when they come in and want to slow traffic, sometimes the neighborhood doesn't like it, or they don't, there's some tension there. So it is really complex, but I just think about where can we also show that, hey, more trees here will help slow traffic, which also makes your neighborhood safer, more desirable, healthier. But also really engaging with community to make sure we're not, especially if we're trying to look at neighborhood targets, that we're not just setting targets without any of that engagement, because it's the folks who live there who should really have the biggest say in how that looks. So just a couple things that made me think.
I went on a tour that was done in the Columbia Slough area. And what struck me there, and I haven't explored levees very much, because there was a statement, they don't want trees along those because they destroy the levees, and yet one of the nicest areas we went to was full of trees on one bank. It was shady, but it seemed like there is space there where there could be tree planting. It's all fill, it's all sand, so you need to be a little fussy as to what you plant there, but it seems like there's an opportunity there, and it's area where I didn't realize this, most of the land adjacent to the slough is private property. There's very little public property there. Maybe the airport has some, but most of it is private property. And it is potentially a wonderful resource for wildlife in the city. And I think the middle slough has wildlife there, but that's where there are trees. And there's vegetation. The area I was at, there's no vegetation on the bottom, whatever you call it, the seafloor, the bottom of the levee. So surely there are not going to be many insects that can live there, which means not many fish. And then, anyway, I think it's an opportunity that needs to be explored. One way to increase canopy, the neighborhoods that are adjacent to that, Cully is a low canopy neighborhood. Sunderland is a low canopy neighborhood. There are a number of neighborhoods. Also, you go North Portland, there's slough there also. So I think it's a way to get more canopy that I don't, the urban forestry, do you do any work in the slough? I mean, I don't know how you could really.
Tree regulations apply there as they do anywhere, so yes, in that regard. To my knowledge, have not focused planting efforts there. Where there are natural areas that are parts of sloughs, those
Right.
are a focus point. And I want to confirm that the Army Corps of Engineers does not allow tree planting on levees or close to levees, and they are very influential.
Respectful.
But I appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Yeah,
That is something we can look at.
yeah, they're in the, for that project right now to redo the levees. I am on the advisory committee for that, so. I will carry your feedback forward.
I can confirm that the Army Corps is very
Yeah.
influential.
Or follow any of.
Yes.
Oh,
I'll
right.
add to that, Parks did acquire property from the old Colwood. Is the Colwood Golf property to preserve as natural areas. So I think that is one strategy that Parks has used to acquire property where we can retain, but yeah, otherwise it's mostly private property along there.
Interestingly, parks acquisitions are not generally focused on tree canopy. They are more broad about greening and recreation.
Just note we have 4 more minutes. This part of the, Commissioner McMillan. Oh, did you have more to?
No, I thought we had till 10:45 though. I do have one.
We actually
Okay.
can go to 10:45.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
great.
sorry about that.
I just wanted to build on the conversation just really quickly about I didn't see who was in the conversation with the Army Corps of Engineers about the slough, but there are ways of using root barriers and different structural barriers so that no structural compromise is made to the levee structure. So if you want to bring that up, there are ways around it just for the greening. I know that they've been evolving on a few topics, and hopefully this could be one that they also evolve on. I love the idea of overlaying both the migratory map as well as the heat island map. And to expound on that, you know, adding waterways. And so we're reducing temperatures of waterway streams for fish as well, and all aquatic, but also greenways and like the Greenway Loop and paths that pedestrians take, specifically schools and school routes, and maybe prioritizing those. So I just wanted to expand on the idea of the overlay as adding intelligence to some of these strategies.
Great suggestion.
Commissioner Feldsey?
Yeah, a quick question about the science. What I hear from everyone is about we might have underestimated the importance of greenways and sort of the connectivity for animals and traveling humans, you know, both in terms of the health effects, but also, you know, the health effects for the humans and animals, but also the trees themselves. So, you know, have a question about that. Is there, you know, evidence that creating connected masses of trees helps better with ameliorating climate, you know, change than sort of piecemealing it. And yeah, I mean, that's really, yeah, my main question about that.
In terms of, I know for sure in terms of providing shade, the density is needed. So that connectivity, I'm not sure. I would maybe defer to others in the room on the science of whether you, I mean, are you talking about specifically storing more carbon or just general kind of all things related to climate resilience?
All things. I was actually, you know, in terms of the heat map too.
I mean, definitely
you
for
know,
heat, having connectivity is important. There is evidence to support that.
Well, in wildlife, whenever you can connect green, you're connecting wildlife. So that's going to contribute to diversity for all species that use those for habitat. And yes, trees live healthier and longer when they're in groups. Often, sometimes it depends on the tree, but we always cluster in, I guess, my profession. We cluster trees because we know they're just going to be happier, and that assists with pollination as well.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead. I guess throughout this conversation, I think someone else brought this up. I'm just thinking about like having a target, what that does, what we hope that does for us, as far as, is it a tool we can use to communicate with the public about urban forestry's priorities? Is it, because is there like accountability set with it? You know, I guess I'm curious on the bigger picture of setting a goal and what we hope it will do. I mean, obviously we hope we'll get more trees, but you know, beyond that, like what we hope the goal will do for us. Cause I think I'm also hearing we also have other, you know, we're tracking things, right? And that helps inform urban forestry's decisions on prioritizing. So that will have continue regardless, I think, right? So yeah, so maybe just what we hope the goal will do broadly.
Yeah, I think, at least from my perspective, initial thoughts are, I mean, using the canopy target to meet all of the other goals that we talked about last time in the plan. So more preservation, equitable distribution, climate resilience, that list. Also, I think to me, the public outreach and public communication is very key, as well as bureau or interdepartment communication and collaboration. I think it's very useful for that. helping us set programmatic priorities. So, you know, if a certain area or location is our priority from the canopy targets perspective, certainly we'd want to make sure our programs support that. But I think there's many other things you could do with canopy targets. Commissioner Clapp brought up comparison to peer cities. It is definitely citywide goals. That's the most common thing that they use. That's the easiest way to compare. But I'm sure there's other ideas that other commissioners may have.
Yeah, I have an idea. One of the things that I think is important about this is it helps relieve scrutiny. So an example that I can think of is PBOT, which I haven't looked into this, but they had a directive to fix ADA ramps. And I don't know how they've prioritized it. And it's been a fun adventure for me to look around and find where they have decided to fix 4 corners on a road. I cannot figure out a pattern. And so if that, if there is nothing, then if someone said, hey, like in this case, the Department of Justice says, how are you guys actually doing this? How are you prioritizing what you're doing? What's your system? Are you just throwing out, you know, a random scattering of cement and hoping that that will work? We could say we have done all of our reviews, we've set our goals, and here's how we are looking to do this. And then you can look back and say, have we actually accomplished this? Or if someone scrutinizes us, we can say, here's our step-by-step process. Here's our target, and here's how we are trying to get it and what that would do. So I think that they're helpful to basically back up whatever you do.
Justify decision.
Exactly. So if someone complains, you're not doing anything for here, which happens with trees all the time. We get scrutinized and criticized for just about anything. I think it's important to have all that backed up data and say, yeah, we did this. So if PBOT had that, then that would be great. They could say, wow, we're prioritizing where people walk most of the time. That would be a great thing, near parks or something like that, which I don't think they've done because it's just a funny pattern. So that was one example.
I think you went over this before, but what tool are we using to measure canopy? Is it expensive? How quick? I mean, if we could measure canopy daily, that would be great, but we probably can't, or it's too expensive, it's not realistic. So what kind of timelines are we using? Because it seems like how small a level we set how small a geographic area we set the canopy goal at, or it depends on what's the means we're going to be using to measure canopy. I mean, what's the cost?
I mean, as of now and what we are planning to continue to use is Metro's LiDAR data.
And that's every year?
Every 3 years, I believe they update
3
it.
years.
And then there is a lag for processing the data and actually getting it.
Okay, and there's nothing in the software that you've gotten that Urban Forestry is using from, I'm forgetting the.
Planet
Geo.
There's nothing in there that relates to canopy measurement.
The Planet Geo software is a kind of a lower level. It's more based on individual trees, work orders and activities around
Okay,
those trees and
okay,
workflow.
yeah.
However, it is a GIS base
Right.
and can incorporate canopy coverage once we've derived it from LiDAR. And
Is that software, is that a feature that we paid for, or is that an add-on?
I don't know specifically. I would think it is included. It's kind of fundamental to ArcGIS in this case. I also wanted to speak to cost. So our analyses using the Metro data have been done internally. It's routine staff work. We have staff whose job and expertise is this kind of thing, so it is relatively low cost. And also we wouldn't, doing it more often than 3 times a year, that would be a much higher cost.
3 times a year,
I'm sorry,
every 3 years.
every 3 years, I misspoke. Doing it more often would be a much higher cost because we would have to generate or find someone to generate the LiDAR.
Yeah, because I think Metro pays for the LiDAR, which I think is several hundred, it's expensive, it's several $100,000, I think, every update, so.
They make it available to.
but they
anyone.
share it,
Yeah,
which is
Yeah,
wonderful.
often across the country, it's often not a city, it is a larger organization or institution that gets that data because of the cost. Okay, so I do, unless there's any other comments, I just want to kind of wrap up and make sure I'm not missing anything. In terms of thinking about the data that we'll consider as we're setting the targets. I have wanting to make sure we're thinking about where's the feasibility to increase canopy and where's the greatest potential. Where can where can we get the greatest bang for our buck? Making sure we're thinking about heat, about our rivers, habitat connectivity, income and equity considerations, equitable distribution. Also opportunities to align with multiple city goals like traffic safety and traffic calming. Also thinking about, I guess, similar to that, kind of safe routes to schools, walking and biking routes, greenways, migratory bird routes. Anything else you would like us to kind of layer into our approach for setting these? That definitely covers a lot, but.
Yeah, I just have one final thing, which is a reiteration of be ambitious and trying to look at things 100% from the data and not thinking so much about the details right now of how to accomplish that. That way we can set our ambition and then move towards those goals and be creative about how we do that, rather than saying, wow, we don't think we can reach that goal for these reasons. That's not I don't think a good reason to not set that goal. So just want to end with that.
I think kind of piggybacking on that, I do think we should be ambitious. I also think we should be accountable because I think Portlanders are tired of promises that are always getting followed through on. And so I wouldn't want to see that also. We have to balance that. So just being aware of what, we do have to be clear-eyed on what the city can deliver reasonably, but also not be too pigeonholed by how we've done things in the past and not thinking more creatively and flexibly about how to do this work. I also think if part of the purpose of the targets is communicating to the public and to other bureaus, I do think the pattern areas map, I feel like a lot of folks would feel like I'm being lumped in with neighborhoods that are nothing like mine, where I don't think it makes sense for my canopy target to be the same as theirs. So I do think that's one thing that also jumped out at me is, when you look at inner North Portland's really different from like, Laurelhurst or what, so yeah, just that too.
Yes. That's about it, well.
Commissioner Felicity.
Yeah, just one final thought, and that is, I didn't realize that we were sort of dealing with such a long time frame to measure what is sort of our hard outcome, right? Canopy coverage every 3 years, and then a long time to process it and so forth. And it actually, it's sort of a big deal because it makes it much more difficult to track, if you're getting anywhere. So just one other thing to think about in this mix is what are the more process measures and intermediate outcomes that are the, most important in the areas that we prioritize, be it, number of plantings, number of tree survival, whatever that is, increasing involvement of community tree planting groups. So I leave that to you guys, and I don't even know if there's anything else other than the things I mentioned. Would love to know that, and maybe, it would be a future discussion point.
Yes, definitely. We do certainly track kind of almost in real time our plantings and things. So that kind of thing we can certainly look at every year, more frequently. But we will, it is on our list of discussion points with you all. So we will be talking about what are some of those metrics and kind of frequency of reporting that we'll be doing as part of this effort at a future meeting.
Commissioner Bechtel?
I just want to amplify the statement about Portlanders being frustrated about promises that aren't kept. I think that's a sentiment that I've heard for several years now, if not more. But I do think we have the ability to set maybe tiered goals or, incremental goals that can help us achieve what we're trying to get at in the long term, so that we can demonstrate our progress in this area. And there's going to be some areas that are already meeting or exceeding the goal also. So when we think about Laurelhurst, they have significant tree canopy in that neighborhood already. So there will be some areas that, that have already met or exceeded what we're looking to achieve. And maybe we can use that data as a starting point to say, do we want areas to look like this or something in between as we look at our different goals? Is there a model or something that that is existing that we could use as a launching point? It might be helpful to frame our thinking. When I look around, I think, okay, this is amazing. This is the type of area I would like to live in, or this is, so I think we can create achievable goals. And it may not be as overwhelming because I think there are some areas that are already meeting the canopy objectives, even though we haven't set them yet. But I do think there are areas that are already good models for adequate tree canopy.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like that idea of instead of only looking to peer cities for what's possible, but just looking locally, since there is so much disparity across different. Yeah. Thank you all for your feedback. Yeah, so we'll keep working on the canopy targets and come back to you when we have some news to report.
So much for keeping that. I know we meant to get to this last one, but I'm glad we had the extra time because that's really, really great to get to discuss this. All right, so our last item on the agenda is the large tree.
Great, you're right on time too. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. Right, so we are talking about the large tree amendment, which we have a public hearing set on this item, a joint hearing of the Urban Forestry Commission and the Planning Commission on Tuesday, July 23rd. Appreciate y'all RSVPing to that. And so this is a bit of a preview of what we'll be discussing more. So this is sort of a abridged version of the presentation that I'll be giving at that public hearing. But I want to provide a little bit of context and make sure y'all have some information going into that. So the large tree amendment is it's a policy within Title 11, the city's tree code, and it'll expire at the end of this year. It expires on December 31st. And so we are holding this public hearing because the Urban Forestry Commission and the Planning Commission are the two bodies that are advisory to City Council when we amend code. And the public hearing is one of the required steps along that process. So it'll be an opportunity for both commissions to hear more information on this, and then the public will have an opportunity to provide public comment as well. And so a bit of context of sort of where we're at in working on Title 11 and updating Title 11. Urban Forestry presented a scope of work to City Council several years ago on a sort of three-phase approach. We are halfway through that. The first phase was a sort of technical and minor policy code amendment project that was completed in 2022, I believe. From there, we said we would update the urban forest plan, which we're doing right now. And then after the urban forest plan is complete, we would have a more substantive Title 11 amendment project that would be guided by our new urban forest plan. The large tree amendment is sunsetting right in the middle of that. And so what we are proposing is to either remove that sunset date, make it a permanent feature of the code. We think there's a lot of evidence to support that approach. Or if there is interest in simply extend it to align with that upcoming project so that both issues can be addressed at the same time. So that's why we're here. Yeah, covered this, the purpose of the public hearing, so I can go ahead and keep this moving along. This is a look at the process for amending Title 11, just to give you a sense of what comes next. So we will have the public hearing on Tuesday. The Urban Forestry Commission and Planning Commission will then, at their next meetings, have a chance to consider what they heard and make a recommendation to City Council. And then we expect this amendment to go to City Council in the fall. We don't have an exact date yet, so it can be determined by how the UFC and Planning Commission recommendations move forward. So first, getting into the amendment, just a little bit about Portland's tree canopy and why we're here. Obviously, we know that there is quite a bit of disparity in terms of how trees are distributed in Portland, and that those typically align with the health risks that Portlanders experience. So the left is a map of Portland's tree canopy, and the right is Multnomah County's heat vulnerability index. Tree preservation is one of the best tools we have to work against the disparity that we have. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but trees are just instrumental to the public health outcomes of Portlanders. So a lot of research going into this. Trees are just one of the best tools that we have. So keeping healthy, thriving trees in the ground is one of the goals of the city's tree code. A little bit about why large trees are so important. So this data comes from the Urban Forest Inventory and Analysis, which the City of Portland or Forestry Group completed with the U.S. Forest Service. And it just shows a breakdown of Portland's trees by size and the associated value and the benefits and services that we receive. So the large tree amendment is really looking at that largest size category, trees 20 inches DBH or greater. And while they're only 13% of our trees, they account for 60% of the value, $5.7 billion in value. So that's why it's so important that we preserve large trees. And just a little bit more on that. Obviously, when we lose a tree, we lose the service that tree was providing for decades. Tree planting takes a very long to replace those benefits, if it ever does. Knowing with the changing climate, we have a lot of challenges right now to growing trees and getting them to provide the services that current trees are doing. And the right is from a U.S. Forest Service paper that kind of shows the sort of theoretical value and benefits of a tree over time. We really start to see the benefits of trees when they reach maturity and reach a larger size. And if we're losing them, we are taking all that investment and time and energy went into getting a tree to that size, and we're just losing it. So this is why we're really trying to prioritize preservation of large trees. I'm going to go into a little bit of the city's tree code. I should note too that if you have questions, there's a lot of information in this PowerPoint. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to stop and answer as I go along. But a little background on the city's tree code. I think we haven't done sort of tree code work in a few years, so I think it was good just to kind of give a little bit of like what level setting. So the city's tree code was originally called for as part of the 2004 Urban Forest Management Plan. So creating a tree code was one of the implementation tools. It was adopted in 2011, but it wasn't fully implemented until 2015. So we've had about 9 years of this current code. There are a lot of caveats to this. So I don't take this as guidance on the code. Our staff at TreesAt can get more specific, but in general, it requires the preservation or and replacement for trees 12 inches or greater. Again, a lot of caveats, but when we're talking about sort of the private property aspect, those are the trees that we're looking at. Urban Forestry is the primary implementer of the code. We're the policy making body for the tree code. But we do work with Portland Permitting Development, formerly Bureau of Development Services, as they are the implementers and issuers of permits related to private property development. So just kind of noting that there is a bit of like a split responsibility there as it comes to implementing the code. Tree code in development. So this is specific to trees on sites. When it comes to street trees, the code has different requirements for those. So we're talking about private property development. We have a lot, and there are trees on site. The code provides clear and objective standards with quite a bit of allowances for tree removal. So there's a baseline of tree removal that is allowed where no mitigation is required. Really, as a rule, there are no trees that are required to be preserved. It simply means that if they're removed, a fee in lieu is paid, and that fee is paid into the city's tree planting and preservation fund. So when I say clear and objective standards, that's a concept sort of across a lot of city codes related to development, with the idea being not a lot of discretion on the part of city staff takes place. It provides the property developer with different options. And the idea is they are clear and objective, where they know what options they have and what the implications of those options are. So in the case of the tree code, they know if certain trees are removed, there's a fee in lieu attached to it. There's also some flexibility in terms of preserving trees when it comes to protecting the root zone. And there are several exemptions from all of these requirements, which I will get into. The first is trees, dead, dying, dangerous, and nuisance species. They are exempt from tree preservation. Affordable housing projects are exempt. And then the next two are really important. I'll get into those a little bit more in the next slide, but that lots under 5,000 square feet are exempt. So these are your smaller sort of infill lots in closer in neighborhoods. And then projects with proposed or existing lot coverage of 85% or more. And what this basically means is if the building getting built covers more than 85% of the lot, they are exempt from all tree preservation requirements. And so this is really looking at that sort of dense housing units in the basically in downtown, in the central city, the inner east side, but also some of the centers and corridors across the city as well. And the idea is that this is aligning the tree code with what the Portland's comprehensive plan calls for in terms of where housing is anticipated. And I'll get into more of that a little bit more on the slide for this, but this is really how tree preservation, on-site tree preservation for private property development works. For trees that are under 12 inches DBH, which is about 67% of all trees in the city, they are not regulated in this sense, so they can be removed, and there's no fee in lieu paid. For your next size up, 12 inches to 20 inches, about 20% of our trees. The code says that 1/3 of those have to be preserved. If they are not preserved, then a fee in lieu is paid. For the remaining 2/3, they can be removed without any fee. And the fee for those is $1,800 per tree to remove those trees that are required to remain on site. The next size up is really what we're discussing here. This is where the large tree amendment comes in. And this is really the tool that we have to preserve large trees by placing an actual price on the value of them. So for trees 20 inches or greater, these are large trees. All of them have to be preserved, or if they're removed, a higher fee in lieu is paid. And that fee is $450 per inch. So for a 20-inch tree, you're talking $9,000, and then it increases from there. So that last size category is really important because that's what the large tree amendment did. It created this higher mitigation fee for these large trees. And then when we talk exemptions, this is a map showing how broad across the city those exemptions are. So I mentioned that lots under 5,000 square feet are exempt from tree preservation. The lots in red are all the lots that are under 5,000 square feet. So, and those account for about 10% of the future housing capacity in Portland. And then in blue are the lots that allow that 85% or more lot coverage. So again, like Central City, some of these centers such as St. John's and Lentz, and then the corridors like Division, North Williams, where we see a lot of large apartment units going in. And so combined, about 80% of Portland's housing capacity is exempt from Title 11. So I think we'll see in the way that this large tree amendment plays out, because of these exemptions, it's a fairly narrow provision of code, because only 13% of our trees get to that size. And then so many lots in Portland are already exempt from those to begin with. So when we look at what projects are actually paying this fee, you can start to see how that plays out. I think I'll stop there and just see if there's any kind of current questions. I know that was kind of a lot of background. We haven't gotten to the actual thing yet. That was just the background on the city's tree code. But any clarifications I can do right now? Yeah.
Heritage trees, is it the same 450?
Heritage trees. So one is heritage trees can generally not be removed in development. So I think we might actually charge double. I think it's actually 900 for heritage trees, but in general, heritage trees can't be removed. So
They can be, or they
cannot.
Okay.
Cannot. So there's a lot of, I'm giving a very broad, there's a lot of intricacies when you get into it. But in general, heritage trees cannot be removed. So those, but I do believe the fee is double if it's a heritage tree.
I believe that's only in a violation.
That's only in a violation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You
That's right.
can't-
If it's illegally removed.
And
Yeah, thank you.
reminder of our entire forest, which is what, 4.2 million trees, approximately 350 of them are heritage trees. So this is an anomaly that's not really relevant to this code discussion.
Commissioner Vandenberg?
Thank you, Brian, for this. I think I just have a couple of questions, mainly because I just want to make certain I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, could you just talk a little bit more, right? Like, I think I was trying to make certain I understand the comment you made around the baseline of tree removal with no mitigation, and like kind of when fee in lieu is and is not required. It seems like largely in most situations, we're not requiring it. So I just really want to make certain I understand that part. And then the second part is, I have ideas, but if after kind of clarifying this, you could just speak to kind of the perceived why around this exemptions related to 5,000 and kind of the lot coverage. I have my ideas, but I'm curious what the arguments are for that. So I know that's a lot, but I'm just like, are we not really requiring much? Can people pretty much cut down the trees? Is that what you're saying? Like, I'm just trying to make certain I understand.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I think I'll answer the first question now, and if I can come back to the second, because I want to get to the large tree amendment, and that's a really good question, but it's deep. So I'll definitely come back to it. Yes, so it gets a little confusing because what the code says is required to preserve, but what they mean by that is you are required to preserve it, but if you don't, you pay a fee in lieu. So the fee in lieu of preserving it is always an option when it comes to trees on site. So for those 12 to 20, the code says that 1/3 are required to be preserved, but the fee in lieu option is always there. So they can remove those 1/3. They just have to pay a fee of $1,800 per tree. And then when we get to the trees 20 inches or greater, it says all need to be preserved. But again, the fee in lieu option is always there. And that's when we charge the higher fee. So it's a little bit confusing because it says required, but really that they are always allowed to be removed. They just have to pay the fee. And then, yeah, I will come back to the small lot exemption. There's a rich history there.
Thanks, Brent. And so pretty much what you're saying is, right, there's no requirements in the less than 12 in all of these other situations, in essence,
Mhm.
they can cut them down, they just might have to pay.
Yeah.
That's, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
If it helps,
Exactly.
I've always described this as either a pay to play or it's just a big stick. There's no incentive, there's just a cost. And which is why you never see trees retained, because the cost, in my opinion, is not high enough compared to the profits they'll make while cutting down those trees, because there's no incentive to keep them.
Yeah.
So it's only a disincentive, it's not enough.
That was gonna be my question, was do we know what effect that's had as far as how often trees get kept? I know it's hard to know that,
Yeah.
but, oh. okay.
Yeah, that is coming.
Great.
Yeah.
So in a, where I get confused, when you're looking at the canopy that's existing on a lot, you're not concerned with what's gonna be built there. In other words, if I wanna build a series of houses on the property and there are trees there, can't I say, well, the footprint of the building is gonna occur where that tree is? So does that mean I can take that tree out without having to pay anything? Cause I need all that space for my buildings.
It depends. If we're talking about the exempt lots that have 85% or more lot coverage or the under 5,000 square foot, then there's no mitigation required. If it is a regulated lot, they would have to pay the fee in lieu if it's a tree 20 inches or greater.
Okay, so in the Beaumont Wilshire neighborhood, there's probably an R5 lot, tiny house, torn down, large tree, the middle of the lot.
Mhm.
It was taken out and now you have, I think condos, or who knows how many units there. So they paid a fee to remove the tree.
They would have paid a fee in lieu because that those don't allow for that much lot coverage. And if it's R5, it's probably a 5,000 or greater square foot lot. Yeah.
And then what they have left is tiny thin spaces where maybe they will plant some small trees.
Right, yeah.
May live or may not.
And then we're getting into the tree planting requirements, which are different.
Right,
Okay,
so-
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. Which can also be avoided by paying a fee in lieu.
No, you have to plant. I don't think you can pay a fee in lieu not to. Either way, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm good. All right, I think I'll answer some more questions as I move into this, so. So that brings us to the large tree amendment. So the purpose of the large tree amendment is to increase the preservation of large trees, continue the clear and objective standards, but also provide for the mitigation of the public and environmental health benefits that are lost when we lose large trees. So these fees go into the tree planting and preservation fund, and those are used to plant trees across the city. This is a little bit of a background on this amendment, and the reason we call it the large tree amendment is because it wasn't in the code at the time it was adopted. So as I mentioned, Title 11 went into effect in 2015, which then only had a flat fee for the removal of tree regardless of size. Pretty quickly, there was a lot of sort of public frustration with seeing these large trees go out and learning that there was almost no fee assessed for that removal. And so the following year, the large tree amendment was passed, and it was sort of viewed as an emergency amendment. And they had a sunset date of 2019 to sort of reflect not a lot of process went into that amendment. It was a quick fix to try and get ahead of this issue that was sort of playing out. In 2019, City Council first extended that deadline to 2024, so it extended it to the current sunset. At that time, though, the Urban Forestry Commission and the Planning Commission made a recommendation to City Council. So the original large tree amendment was set at a 36-inch DBH threshold, which is just an exceptionally large tree. Both the Urban Forestry Commission and Planning and Sustainability Commission said that should be 20 inches. This is not capturing enough trees in the city. So we did some staff work to look at that recommendation, staff recommended it and city council adopted that in 2020. So that leads us to the current policy. That's how we're at this 20-inch threshold right now. The city council left that sunset date in place, which is why we're here right now to address that. And so this is just a review of sort of what that large tree amendment did. The table on the left was the current code, which took that 12 inches or greater and applied that 1/3 preservation requirement to all those trees. So that meant that if, say, there were 3 trees on site, the developer could say, okay, I'm only going to preserve the smallest, remove the 2 big ones, and only $1,800 per tree. So the large tree amendment brought in this separate size category to increase the preservation requirement, or at least increase the fee in lieu that is paid. And this is a look at how our fees line up against the structural value of those trees. So you can see at a few different sizes, 24 inches, 32 and 40. In general, our mitigation payments are still under the value of those trees. And actually, as the tree increases, we actually see a larger gap between the mitigation fee. And we haven't increased that fee in lieu since 2019. So the relative value of that fee in lieu has actually decreased over time. This is looking back at when we lowered that size threshold in 2020 at the recommendation of the UFC and the Planning and Sustainability Commission. We did a bit of work to look at what that would mean. So first we did some community engagement, saw broad community support for that. We often see broad community support for preserving large mature trees. We also looked at what the original large tree amendment did, the one that had the 36-inch threshold. We saw a 64% reduction in large trees after that went into place. So we had some good evidence that this has been an effective tool. And then also we worked with Johnson Economics, which is a local group that to look at what would be the impact on future housing development if we adopted that 20-inch rule, that 20-inch size threshold. And they saw almost no future impact on housing. Only 54 fewer housing units over a 20-year period. And again, that's a reflection of these are rare trees and there are so many exemptions in the code that it doesn't apply that often. So that's why you're seeing not a lot of housing units would not be built because of this. More recently, as we've been doing our urban forest plan, not surprisingly, we are seeing a lot of comments about preserving large mature trees. In our community survey, 76% of respondents prioritize that. It's very important. We've received hundreds of comments about this issue. So we know that Portlanders are expecting trees to be preserved as new housing is getting built. And now looking at the last few years. So we lowered the size threshold to 20 inches. That happened in 2020. And so we've had 3 years now of this current iteration of large tree amendment in place to look at what the impact has been. And we saw a 68% reduction in large trees being removed. So for the 3 years before that, 2017, 2020, an average of 365 trees were removed per year that were larger than 20 inches. After that, only 114 were removed. So we've seen a really dramatic decrease in large trees being removed in development. That did occur during a period of reduced development activity. But one thing to keep in mind is projects take a long time to get built. So a lot of units were in the pipeline even as COVID hit. And so we still saw quite a bit of development activity. In general, about a 25% reduction in projects though. So the good news is that the reduction in tree removal outpaced the reduction in development overall. So it's been an effective tool. And then during that time, really consistent with what the comprehensive plan calls for, 83% of new housing units were built in those zones that are eligible for those exemptions. So again, we're seeing how sort of narrowly this provision of code is actually being applied. So narrow that actually only 62 housing projects have paid a fee under the large tree amendment, which is less than 3% of all the housing projects built during that time period. And the total payments were about $1.3 million. And then this is the breakdown. I won't go through all of this. I'll share the PowerPoint if you want to look more closely, but it's just kind of showing like how this plays out by the different project types. So when you have a relatively high value project like an apartment building, we saw about 21 of the 130 apartments paying this fee. The median payment was $15,000, but those work out to 0.3% of the total value of the project. So, and this is where we expect to get a lot of our housing units built. Those apartments, those townhouses, that's what our zoning code is really calling for. So you can see as a percentage of the project value, really, really low. It increases as we get to smaller projects like single unit dwellings or an 80 ADUs. But again, only 4 ADU projects out of 443 pay this fee. So again, a real function of how Title 11 exempts a lot of projects to start. And then lastly, the fee is used to plant trees. So it goes into our tree planting and preservation fund. It's restricted by code to be used to plant and establish trees. Our planting program is guided by the citywide tree planting strategy of 2018. And that fund's been used to plant 42,000 trees since 2015. And on the right, you can see is this is from our 2022 tree planting report. Sort of like a heat map of where those trees have gone. And so this is the actual amendment that we're proposing. So our primary recommendation is to remove the sunset date language from the code. We think there's a lot of evidence that this is working. It is not preventing housing from getting built, and it's keeping large trees in the ground. If there is interest from the commissions to extend it as opposed to remove it, we would ask that it be extended at least 5 years in order to allow for the future code work to take place. All right, so next up from here, we have the public hearing on Tuesday. The commissions will then make their recommendations, and that would be a written statement to city council that would accompany the ordinance to amend the code. And then we are thinking, sorry, that should say late fall, not late November, sometime in the fall. We expect this to come to city council for the first hearing. All right, been talking a while. Yeah, any questions on that?
Chair
Ma'am?
McMillan?
Yeah, are there any exemptions or applications for hardship or some sort of, I don't want to say loopholes, but you
I
understand what I'm
don't
saying?
believe there
No?
are.
Okay,
No, there's no, I think the kind of assumption is if the project's moving to development, they're probably not gonna qualify for like low income or anything like that, but there isn't anything in place for that
so
specifically.
nothing for maybe schools or nonprofits or,
Okay, thank you.
okay.
No, nothing like that, yeah. Sorry.
One thing I'd like to add, just as a note, the median price that you put up there for the first most expensive projects, that calculates out as a tree that's about 34 inches in diameter. So that would be the median sized tree for those top 2 things, and we get larger as you go down. So those are huge trees that are being taken out.
Yep.
Mayor Bilsey?
Thanks. Yeah, just wanted to commend you on the presentation. I think it's really excellent, very straightforward. Can't see how it wouldn't get a yes. I do have a question, and that's more for sort of future strategy, because I think you've probably gotten hints from the commissioners that, this is still sort of a problematic amount of trees that are being removed with development, right? And so I'm wondering if we know anything about the recent loss that we've had, during the last measurement period of canopy, and how I've heard you say that we think it's mostly from development, and wondering if we know anything further about types of trees that were removed and how this whole permitting came into play with that.
Yeah, so we are doing some of that analysis part of the urban forest plan. I believe it's about 134 acres of canopy that were lost on properties that had development take place. Obviously, that could potentially be the removal of a tree on an adjacent property and the limbs come in, and so it gets counted towards that specific lot. But that was the analysis we were able to do with the data that we had. I don't believe that development is the leading driver. I've had to go back and look at the analysis done because we have tree removal happens in non-development situations as well. And so I don't know if we can say that development is the primary driver of it. But it is a factor for sure. And you're absolutely right. Even with the effectiveness of the large tree amendment, there's still quite a bit of large trees being removed. And so I think there is a lot of work to be done on that front still.
I think Jeff was pretty clear. He said it wasn't development he thought it was on non-development lots.
Yeah, I think we saw more tree removal or canopy loss through non-development permits than development. I think there's a few caveats with that. One being we want to see the removal of dead, dying, and dangerous trees. Right. So some is sort of good removal. That's good forest management. And then there's things like healthy trees where there are ways to do that through the non-development code. And so it gets a little bit complicated to split it out, but yeah, in general, more trees and more canopy loss through the non-development part of code.
Commissioner Vandenberg?
Well, and just again, I'm asking for a lot of clarity today, y'all. Is like, it sounds like, right, the large tree amendment, which I'm stoked to hear, like how successful is it. I remember these earlier conversations, has been effective. So for the purposes of the upcoming meeting, is the focus primarily on, in essence, kind of removing the sunset versus potentially some of these other amendments we think may need to be made to be successful related to some of the other issues?
Yes, great question. So this public hearing is specifically to the large tree amendment provision of code. If it were to expire, I think that would have really detrimental impacts on Portland's tree canopy. We think it's been effective and it hasn't discouraged the development of housing. We want to be really clear-eyed about we have a housing crisis in addition to environmental crisis, climate crisis, public health crisis really hit the heat. So we don't want to just disregard all these other priorities that the Portland community has to focus entirely on one. And so we think it's really important to keep it in place. And then the idea being that we have a planned amendment project on Title 11, and that's when we can look at these issues a little bit more holistically.
Yeah, I think we should certainly support the amendment, and I think we should also be cognizant of us, like the possibility of it just kind of getting kicked down the road again if the recommendation number 2 was taken. And I think overall, we should be in support of exactly what you've proposed, specifically number one. But I think that we should also, I don't know if this next meeting or any time specifically is the right time for that. But we need to convince other bureaus that manage this, because urban forestry doesn't actually have anything to do with managing this particular set of code. This is done through what used to be planning and zoning, Portland Development, I think.
Portland Permitting and Development now, yeah.
So it is, it's under Title 11. We don't actually do anything with it, being urban forestry. But the thing that I think is important is that there is no carrot that comes along with a stick. And that whenever we're in a situation where a developer, like what Commissioner Nelson brought up, they, this is where our building footprint is. There is very little ability for them to have an incentive to move their building around and make it taller perhaps, or shift the how close they can get to different property lines. So there's a big stick that says you have to pay this much to cut down this big tree. If there is, I think we should also encourage a pairing with that, so that we can say it costs this much to cut down this tree, but we'll let you do this also if you don't cut it down. So there's a way for us to balance that incentive and get them to, them being developers, anyone who has a property, if say they are their own person, they own their property, they've been looking forward to doing this remodel, they're not a big developer, and they have this huge tree that requires this giant space of protection around it. If they could have an incentive that says, great, instead of having a 2-story building limit, you can go to a 3-story building and change something like that. I know that's completely out of our purview, but planning and zoning or planning commission has something to do with that. So it would be a good opportunity to, in some way, present an incentive rather than a disincentive.
Thank you for that comment, Commissioner Platt, and I want to provide information on that. Just a reminder that we're focused right now on this date in code that will mean the current provisions, which have been somewhat successful, largely successful, will disappear at the end of the calendar year. And the larger project is an opportunity to get into the incentives that you're talking about, which sound very interesting to explore. That's one. And two, you all had a presentation a few months ago from the transition team leading development of Portland, help me.
Planning and development.
Oh.
Thank you. For some reason, it just left my brain.
It's only been here for 2 weeks.
Well, for me and us, it's been in the works for a year and a half. There are a lot of staff working on that from urban forestry and other bureaus. It may be something for you all to consider, to invite the leaders of that transition and that bureau back to speak to you about how they are implementing tree requirements going forward for your consideration. Thanks.
Commissioner Feldstein?
Yeah, just wanted to make sure we left time for Brian to kind of articulate, how do you think this is going to go next week, and what role would be useful for the commissioners to play?
Yeah, so the way the hearing, the sort of run of show, I'll provide very similar briefing that I just did. Commissioner Vivek Shandas will actually give invited testimony on some of the research he's done on the importance of tree preservation, impacts on heat islands, public health impacts. And so then after that, I think there'll be a short period where commissioners can ask questions. But the primary purpose of the public hearing is to hear public comments. So we'll move to the public comment period, and then I think there will be a chance for the commissioners to ask questions at the end. I think one of the things that we're hoping to have happen in the hearing is to get a sense of what direction the commissions are leading. They will each have their separate meetings in August to make their formal recommendations. I think that'll be a good opportunity for just the commissioners to go back and forth a little bit, hear where they're all at. I think the Planning Commission is pretty supportive of this. I think I think that's the direction this will go. But obviously, any work y'all could do to support the case, I think would be really helpful for us.
So a comment Brian made in a meeting he and I were a part of is that when this comes to city council, the potential danger is that it's opening up the tree code. And if a city commissioner wants to bring something else in, they might. I mean, so it's in a way, to your comment, Casey, excuse me, Commissioner Clapp, they were both guilty. We want to keep them focused narrowly. So they don't go straying into areas that we're not ready for. But it could happen with these particular city commissioners, or I suppose any city commissioner in the future. But that's a concern.
Yeah, we have the benefit of this being an existing policy, so we're not proposing a policy change, proposing a continuation of the current policy. I think given all the changes happening in the city, the transition that for the permanent development is going through, changing regulations during that period would be very disruptive to that. So they're very supportive of this staying in place as well. So I think that's a really strong argument for it, is that we're not instituting a policy change. We're just continuing a policy that has been in effect, and the results have been good.
And in the briefings that we've done with council staff thus far, which there will be more of, introduction, Brian, as he did today for y'all, made clear that this is implementing a 3-part plan that council approved a while ago, that we have an opportunity to do other code amendments coming in the near future. And that we really want those to be informed by an updated forest management.
Before we wrap up, could I get a quick show of hands of who plans to attend in person on Tuesday? Want to make sure that we have enough seats for everyone. See, 2 in the room. Commissioner Lilly, Commissioner McMillan, maybe. That's great. That's totally fine. So it looks like we're looking at probably 3 to 4 in person.
Is there any childcare?
There's no childcare. I think they're ordering food for the commissioners, but I don't believe there's childcare. Okay, got it. That's great. Thanks. Yeah.
Brian, this is Darely. I'm going to try to make it, and just my work is a little unpredictable right now, but I'm going to try to make it in person.
Sure. Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Can you remind where it is?
Yes, I'm sorry. It is at it's at the CDS or PP&D building at 1900 Southwest 4th Avenue. And it's on the 2nd floor. There'll be like signs and staff to direct you. And you should all be receiving a Zoom link in your email probably tomorrow, I think. So.
I make a quick statement if we're done with large tree amendments.
Can I make a large tree amendment?
Yes.
I just want you all to know that Brian has led this whole effort, and it's been a lot of important work. So thank you to Brian, and his work has been really commendable and super informative for this important code amendment.
Thank you so much, Brian. You appreciate you.
You make a compelling case.
Yes.
Good.
I just wanted to say, so when I misspoke earlier and wanted to correct it for the notes, when I mentioned the LiDAR data being updated every 3 years, thank you, City Forester Carr, for correcting me. It is every 5 years, not 3 years. Just want to make sure we have that accurately recording in all the notes.
Okay. Is adjourned. Everybody. Thank
All
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
It's
you.
good to see you. Bye-bye.
right.